If you're a Christian single woman who wants to have a great relationship with your future husband one day, this isn't going to happen by accident. You actually have to start preparing for that outcome right now during your season of singleness. And one passage in the Bible that's really helpful in outlining the qualities a godly man enjoys in a godly woman is Ruth chapter 1. And by studying this chapter, we're going to discover 5 principles that you can start developing in yourself right now that are actually going to increase the joy your husband will have in you in your future marriage. Not only will this benefit your relationship later on, it will also help attract the right guy that you're hoping to attract one day. And if you want me to make the other side to this video, where I talk about what a man can develop in himself by going through Ruth chapter 2, then let's get this video up to 3,000 likes. That way I know that this is content you actually want to see, and I'll make that video. So again, if you want to see the other side to this, make sure you tap the thumbs up button. Point 1 comes from Ruth chapter 1, verses 1 through 5. You can read that passage by pausing this video and reading it on the screen right now. The principle we're going to form from this passage is that you have to learn from women who actually have what you want to have one day. Ruth was a Moabite woman, which meant she grew up in an extremely sinful, evil environment. Everywhere she looked, there was dysfunction in men and women. For example, in Jeremiah 48:29, it states, "We have heard of the pride of Moab. He is very proud of his loftiness, his pride, and his arrogance, and the haughtiness of his heart." This helps us understand why Ruth was so drawn to Naomi. Something about Naomi just was very different to Ruth, which is why she dedicated herself so passionately to this older woman. Now, before Naomi lost her husband and her 2 sons, she had everything that Ruth desired. And when you keep reading in the book of Ruth and you read chapters 3 and 4, you see that Naomi was extremely pivotal in Ruth's life in helping her in her relationship with Boaz. If it wasn't for Naomi, Ruth would not have had this relationship with Boaz. Likewise, if you want to avoid ending up like all the modern women that you see around you, these women that are preaching self-sufficiency, but on the other hand, crying about their loneliness, women who are sleeping around before marriage and yet saying they want a godly man to cherish them, women who have abortions, but then later in life are sad about not having children, women who are disrespectful towards men, but want a man to lay down their life and be a good, godly man who sacrifices for them. If you want to avoid being like this, then you need to surround yourself with women who actually have what you hope to have one day. So if you want a godly husband one day, you have to learn from the women who actually have a godly husband. If you want to be a loving mother one day, surround yourself with loving mothers right now. If you want to be a Proverbs 31 woman, look to build friendships with other Proverbs 31 women. Modern women who don't have what you want aren't going to be able to help you get what you desire. So if you're spending all of your time with women who have been indoctrinated with cultural lies, then you can't be surprised if that's the road that you end up walking down yourself. As scripture says, bad company corrupts good character. So our first principle is learn from the women who have what you want. Point 2 comes from Ruth chapter 1, verses 6 through 14. Again, you can pause this video and read that passage for yourself. The principle we can form from this passage is that you have to start choosing the best spiritual path for yourself, even when it's not the easiest earthly path. After all the men died in Naomi's family, she told her 2 daughters-in-law to go back to their families in Moab. And this was actually really good advice because she was going back to Bethlehem, which would have been a foreign nation for her 2 Moabite daughters-in-law. And this would have just been extremely difficult for them, even more difficult than their life already was being 2 widows. At least in Moab, they would have been surrounded by family and maybe would have got some national loyalty to them because they're around other Moabites. But when you go somewhere else that you're not from that nation, it's that much harder to get assistance. So by going to Bethlehem, they were choosing a harder earthly path. But notice what Ruth did. Even though this was a harder earthly path, she knew it was the better spiritual path. In Ruth chapter 1, verse 14, it says, "But Ruth clung to her," meaning Naomi. Orpah made the wise decision, that's Ruth's sister-in-law, by earthly standards. She went back to Moab. But Ruth made the right decision by spiritual standards. She left that godless nation and chose to follow the one true God. So this is really important when it comes to relationships because Ruth was making good spiritual choices before she met Boaz. It's not realistic to think that once you meet a godly man, then you're just going to flip the switch and be able to make godly decisions that agree with this man's character that you're hoping to find. We have to, as men and women, both have the type of character that we desire in the other person. So if you're not making these hard spiritual choices and you're constantly choosing the easiest path, first off, you're not going to attract the type of guy who's living in a different spiritual way. And secondly, this spiritual maturity actually takes time to develop. So if you try to start developing that once you get into a relationship, you're already going to be putting yourself at a disadvantage. You have to be developing this spiritual character before you actually get into that type of relationship. Our third point comes from Ruth chapter 1, verses 15 through 18. It states, "And she said, 'See, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people, to her gods. Return after your sister-in-law.' But Ruth said, 'Do not urge me to leave you or to return from following you. For where you go, I will go, and where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there will I be buried. May the Lord do so to me, and more also, if anything but death parts me from you.' And when Naomi saw that she was determined to go with her, she said no more." While Ruth said this to her mother-in-law, Naomi, these are the exact words a man wants to hear from the woman that he ends up with. Where you go, I will go. Where you die, I'm going to die. This is the type of thing a man wants his woman to be able to say to him. So here's the spiritual principle that you can start developing. Learn to be loyal to people right now before you have a husband to be loyal to. Eventually, Ruth became Boaz's loyal wife. But before she got into that role, God blessed her with that role, she was already developing loyalty in other areas of her life. Loyalty isn't something that comes natural or that you're just born with. It's actually a character trait that you actually have to develop. Notice what it says. It says Ruth was determined. And this determination in her to be loyal was very attractive to Boaz. Every man wants a loyal woman. To be loyal in a relationship means you reject every other man and solely focus your romantic attention on this one man. This loyalty endures through hard times and good times. You're going to stick with him when he's poor and when he's wealthy. You're going to be there when his mental health is doing bad and when it's doing great. Through loyalty, you get to experience his losses and his victories. And if you do this for him, he will love you with all of his heart. But again, this is something that has to be developed because loyalty is extremely difficult. This is why it's so hard for men and women to find a loyal partner. I'm not saying this is easy for men to be either. They have to develop this loyalty as well. But since we're talking from the woman's perspective, you have to start making choices right now that actually develop you into this. So if you start taking the easy path at work and start being disloyal and cheating to get ahead, if you start backstabbing your friends and you're not there for them when they actually need you in their time of crisis, if you start taking the easy path right now, all you're really doing is training yourself to take the easy path in marriage one day. You're just going to keep doing what you've always been doing your whole life. You're not going to automatically change into this mature person just because you have a ring on your finger. So if you want to attract a godly man and have a great relationship with him in marriage one day, Develop into being a loyal woman. Our fourth point comes from Ruth chapter 1, verses 19 through 21. So the two of them went on until they came to Bethlehem, and when they came to Bethlehem, the whole town was stirred because of them. And the women said, "Is this not Naomi?" She said to them, "Do not call me Naomi, call me Mara, for the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me. I went away full, and the Lord has brought me back empty. Why call me Naomi, when the Lord has testified against me, and the Almighty has brought calamity upon me?" Here's the principle. Let God transform you through the pain that you will go through. Pain will always change you. It will either transform you into a worse version of yourself, or it will be used to transform you into a better version of yourself. And the result basically depends on how you respond to God during your moments of pain, during your seasons of pain. If you dedicate yourself to the Lord in your pain and give it all to Him, He actually will use that to transform you into an even better version of the person that He's making you. While this passage is talking about Naomi, it's extremely clear that Ruth was going through a terrible experience herself. She was also a widow. And not only that, she was now in a foreign land where she knew nobody. She didn't know how she was going to have her next meal. She didn't know what was going to happen to her and to her mother-in-law that she dearly loved. Like Naomi, Ruth was suffering. And also like Naomi, Ruth's pain didn't last forever. When they were faithful to God through their trial, God actually used that trial to transform their situation and give them something even better than what they lost. Pain will change you, and how it will change you depends on how you respond to God in those moments of pain. Will you abandon the Lord, or will you stay faithful and then allow Him to bless you? And for point 5, our passage is Ruth chapter 1, verse 22. And they came to Bethlehem at the beginning of barley harvest. The principle is you will form relationships with the type of people you surround yourself with. Ruth never would have met Boaz if she didn't first travel to Bethlehem. God made relationships to operate in such a way where you form connections with the people that you spend time with. And this principle can be used for good and bad. If you spend time with people who hate God and aren't living for Him, then you're going to make attachments to those people. But if you spend time with people who are loving God and are trying to please Him, then you will form attachments through those people. The time we spend with people creates attachments. So this means if you're spending time with men who just want to have sexual relationships before marriage, men who are breadcrumbing you, and men who don't love Jesus, that means you're always going to be in a relationship with these types of men. So the first step to actually getting into a relationship with a godly man is to start broader and develop relationships in a community of people, including men, who are actually living for Christ. Ruth met Boaz because she moved to Bethlehem. If you want to meet your Boaz, pray about where the Lord might be leading you to develop a godly community. So again, if you want to see part 2 to this, and you want me to go through Ruth chapter 2 like I just went through Ruth chapter 1, help me get this video up to 3,000 likes. Again, that's going to help me know if this content is what you want to see and if it's helpful to you. I'm Mark from ApplyGodsWord.com. I'll see you in the next video.